Hi, it's Mark and welcome back to No Book Left Behind, and today I'll be looking at the British Library's Tales of the Weird series, volumes 4, 5 and 6. Hi, it's Mark and welcome back to the channel, and today I'll be talking about the British Library's Tales of the Weird series, volumes 4, 5 and 6. But first, ho ho ho, Merry Christmas! Okay, now I got that out of the way, let's get over to the books. Okay, I could have actually decked the shelves behind me with tinsel, worn a silly Santa hat and tried to pretend that this was recorded on Christmas Day because that's when this video should be going out. But really, it's a bit silly, isn't it? I feel like one of those phony TV shows where they do that in their special Christmas episode and all that when they've actually filmed it in October or whatever. It's actually the 20th of December today, the Friday before, so, sorry to shatter your illusions, but that's how it is. But I am being festive to some extent at least, because volume 5 of the books I'll be reviewing today is a book of Christmas ghost stories. But first perhaps I need to explain what the British Library's Tales of the Weird series is. If you already know this information, please feel free to skip ahead, but I'm going to be pretty brief anyway. Since 2019, the British Library have been delving into their archives and producing an almost monthly paperback on their Tales of the Weird series. These are collections of supernatural short stories, mostly by forgotten authors, sometimes by famous ones. They're currently up to 68 volumes at the time of filming, and I've reviewed the first 3 already in a video which I'll post a link to in the description below. That done, let's move on to the first book being reviewed today, which is volume 4, which is Mortal Echoes: Encounters with the End, which is 15 tales dealing with death and what happens afterwards. And this was edited by Greg Buswell. And this one surprised me quite a bit, because the first 3 volumes in the series feature stories almost exclusively by authors who are forgotten to time or who only have small but devoted followings these days. This one, on the other hand, is very different. Of the 15 authors featured here, not only have I read work by 10 of them, 5 of these very stories in the collection I've read before. I mean, what literary horror fan hasn't read Poe's Masque of the Red Death or Charles Dickens' The Signal Man? And I'm sure many people are familiar with The Incident at Owl Creek Bridge by Ambrose Bierce and Sheridan Le Fanu's Strange Event in the Life of Shalkan the Painter. So what prompted this swerve into, I guess, what you call greatest hits territory is a bit of a mystery to me. The only thing I can think is that perhaps the first 3 volumes in the series didn't quite sell as well as they were expecting. On the bright side, rereading some of these stories, of course, is an absolute joy. They're top quality stuff. But that's not really what I come to the Tales for the Weird series for. I'm looking for some of those writers that they're bringing back from the dead. Some names that I either don't know, or some authors such as Algernon Blackwood, for example, who I've heard of many times over the years but never had the opportunity to try any of their work. And as a result, I have kind of mixed feelings about this volume. However, I did get a real bonus here, because the collection features a story by Nathaniel Hawthorne called Rappaccini's Daughter. Now, I had tried some of Hawthorne's work in the past, specifically the novel The House of the Seven Gables, which is one of his foundational works. But I couldn't get on with it at all. I found it to be rambling, unfocused, pretty dull, and not very engaging. And inevitably, I simply dismissed him. He wasn't for me. But then reading Rappaccini's Daughter has completely changed my mind, because I think it's a spellbinding, masterful piece of work. As a result, if you've seen my previous lazy content book haul, you'll know that I've bought a volume of his Twice Told Tales, because I'm keen to give him another go now. And that's one of the benefits that I get from this Tales of the Weird series. It's one of the reasons why I love it so much. Now, the stories I've already mentioned here overshadow the rest of the content. That's fairly inevitable, but I do have some honourable mentions. Kiss Me Again, Stranger by Daphne du Maurier, Death by Scrabble by Charlie Fish, which is very funny, and Your Tiny Hand is Frozen by Robert Aikman, who is an author I really want to check out, and I'll be looking to do that next year, I think. Clearly, with these heavyweights on the roster, this is a very strong collection of stories, but I do prefer those volumes in the series where I can read more obscure material by more obscure authors. However, if you're looking to get into early 20th century supernatural fiction and you've not read much of it yet, this is a perfect place to start. It's a great primer. For those with a bit more reading experience, perhaps not so much. Now let's move on to Volume 5 in the series. And that one is our festive entry. It's Spirits of the Season, Christmas Hauntings. And this one was edited by Tanya Kirk. So it's Christmas time. Merry Christmas. And one of the great British traditions of Christmas, aside from overeating, awkward family get-togethers and tons of repeats on the television, is telling ghost stories. So how did this rather strange tradition start? Well, apparently it has its roots in the 17th century, but really got popular in the Victorian era, in no small part due to Charles Dickens and his publication in 1843 of A Christmas Carol. Now, this was the dawn of widespread public literacy in Great Britain, and reading had become enormously popular, and Dickens was very careful to make A Christmas Carol affordable to the general public. In today's money, it was retailing at about £1.50 a copy, and that's $2 in American money. The first run of 6,000 copies were sold out by Christmas Eve, and although that might not seem like big numbers to us today, it was massively significant at the time. It prompted many popular magazines to publish Christmas editions that were filled with ghost stories, and that's where some of these tales would have seen the light of the day for the first time. The first thing to mention is that there are not many chillers here. These stories seem mostly to have been selected for their sense of humour, and I'm afraid I did tend to find that selection to be a little disappointing. That's not to say it's a bad anthology, just that I don't think it stacks up all that well against earlier volumes in the series. Perhaps I should have taken the inclusion of M.R. James' The Story of a Disappearance and an Appearance as an indication, because I've always found that to be one of the least appealing of the great man's spooky tales. Anyway, looking at the positive side, I felt there were two obvious highlights here. The first being The Christmas Shadrach by Frank R. Stockton. Now, this is a tale of a strange stone and our hero's attempts to use its odd powers to manipulate the women in his life. It doesn't go at all well, and every time he tries to do something more, things just get worse and worse, and the reader gets to have a hearty chuckle at his expense. It's different, it's smartly written, and it's pretty amusing. A hidden gem, in my opinion. Now, Stockton was actually more famous for his fairy tales and children's stories, would you believe? Although he had the odd stab at speculative science fiction and at least one go at lost world literature with a book called The Great Stone of Sardis, which I do have a copy of and will probably be reviewing on the channel next year. The other main highlight for me was The Kit Bag by Algernon Blackwood, which is one of the few straight serious stories here. It's the tale of what happens when the forces of law and order don't maintain a proper chain of evidence, and this administrative cock-up leaves a legal clerk in possession of a kit bag which was previously owned by a mass murderer. It's not an outstanding plot, but it is a story very well told and a cut above the rest of the material in the anthology. Special mention must also go to an 1882 tale by F. Anstey called The Curse of the Cataflakes or Flax or something. I can't really pronounce the family's name, to be honest with you. But it's reminiscent of the Christmas Shadrach in a way, in which we have a hapless, bumbling hero who gets in over his head when it comes to supernatural matters. This time he's impersonating an acquaintance of his in order to marry into money. And it's quite funny to watch him slowly losing his nerve as the details of a certain family tradition emerge. Unfortunately, the ending is a massive letdown, and the author even acknowledges that in the text, which in itself is quite funny, but it still doesn't make for a very satisfying conclusion. Elsewhere, we've got The Shadow by E. Nesbit, an author most generally remembered for children's stories such as Five Children and It and The Railway Children. E.F. Benson, who seems to be a mainstay of this Tales from the Weird series, delivers Boxing Night. And there's a surprising appearance by J.B. Priestley of an Inspector Calls fame, whose story, The Demon King, is actually very amusing indeed, even if it is rather a one-joke exercise. The rest of the tales come from forgotten authors, and although I wouldn't single any of them out as being particularly weak, they just don't really linger very long in the memory. It's a decent enough anthology, I just don't think it stacks up very well against the previous entries in the series. So now let's move on to the last volume I'm reviewing today, Volume 6. And if you watched my Halloween 48-hour reading marathon video, you'll know that I've already tackled The Platform Edge Uncanny Tales of the Railways, edited by Mike Ashley, and what a damn good time I had reading it, although it did make me question whether I wanted to take a train next time I go on a trip anywhere, because there are a lot of derailments and serious accidents in these stories. Now, this is a very high quality anthology for me, and for the most part we're back to the usual rogues gallery of unknown and forgotten authors from the early 20th century, although Ashley does include some later work too, including a story by F. Scott Fitzgerald, which I think is the most surprising name ever to crop up in the Tales of the Weird series, at least so far. There are a few other familiar names too, such as the inevitable appearance of E.F. Benson, who seems contractually obliged to appear in every one of these anthologies. Well, not quite, but most of them. And also Juan Lee, whose The Tragedy in the Train is one of the better stories here. I also really had a lot of time for The Strange Story of Engine 651 by Victor Whitechurch. And A Smoking Ghost by W.G. Kelly is a particularly fine example of the genre. But the two biggest standouts here are arguably the two biggest names. Edgar Wallace was a famous author of mysteries in the early part of the 20th century, and he wrote so many of them that one of his publishers once said that he thought 1/4 of all the books in England were written by Wallace. And if that sounds like hyperbole, it probably was, but Wallace in fact did write over 170 novels. He also wrote about 1,000 short stories, give or take, and one of those is The Barford Snake, which appears in this collection. And it's a tale of mysterious supernatural manipulation and revenge, and it's great. And perhaps simply because of how many novels and works that Wallace wrote, I never took him particularly seriously as an author, but perhaps now I'll give him a bit of a go. But the jewel in the crown for me here was undoubtedly The Underground by R. Chetwynd Hayes. Now, his was a name that I'd heard of before in relation to an anthology horror film that came out in 1980 called The Monster Club. But despite the presence of genre superstars Vincent Price and John Carradine, it's not a very good movie, and so I wasn't really prompted to check out any of Chetwynd Hayes' written work. But I was extraordinarily impressed by The Underground. It's a very fine and very original tale. And Chetwynd Hayes' writing reminded me a little of M.R. James in the fact that his word selection is almost surgically perfect, and he can create a massive amount of atmosphere with very little prose. Since reading the story at Halloween, I've bought and finished a collection of his short stories called The Unbidden, and if you watch my reading roundup video from November, you'll know how impressed I was with that collection. And that's why I've fallen in love with this Tales of the Weird series. It's such a great way to discover forgotten authors and to check out some that I've been meaning to read for a long time but just never managed to get round to. And I've been able to add a couple more names to my ever-growing list of favourite writers. And that's it for today's video then. Thank you very much for watching and for staying with me until the end. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank some new subscribers who've come on board this month. And so here's a shout out to Armand's Opinion, Audrey Shorty, Sharon Powell, BIP2300 and Shakin' Sherlock 66. Welcome to the channel. Apologies to anyone I may have missed. So if you want a name drop here, please don't forget to like, subscribe and ring that notification bell. I know it's not much, but hey, what you gonna do? And remember, keep rummaging through those charity bookshelves and visiting those second-hand bookshops, because there are some obscure treasures out there that only you can find. Merry Christmas and happy holidays.